close friend that, he's ahead of the
We're on Facebook tonight. Oh my God. Sorry. We're going to tell everyone that this lens makes everybody look 50 pounds heavy. This group that's speaking is actually very, very thin. All right. So I gotta be right. I've got the statement. They'll share this. Pretty big. Hear us. It is. Can the Facebook audience hear us? All right, we're going to start if everybody can get to their seats. All right. Thank you all for coming. Tonight, we're going to try to deal with how to avoid penalties and criminal prosecution. We're going to do it the way we're going to work it tonight. The first hour is going to be about criminal. And how do these cases that should seem like just another tax case that we have in our office become criminal tax cases? And
Frank, it's hard to hear that.
all right, I can raise the volume. Can you hear me now? Better? All right, and the speakers around the room, now it's too loud. All right. So the first hour will be on the criminals. Then the second hour, we're going to try to combine the penalties that you see the most and the penalties that are asked about on the tax court bar exam, right? Because they are the same. So I'm going to try to integrate what we teach for the class, for those people taking the exam, plus what you need to know in your practice on how to avoid penalties. Right? The first hour, we're very, very lucky to have Pete Greco and John Gagliardi. John Gagliardi, you guys all know, and I've known John for a long time. John had almost every job you can have at the IRS. Right? He starts as a revenue agent, and then he graduates up. He becomes a room manager, and then he was ASAC in Manhattan, which is really one of the premier offices of the Internal Revenue Service. So John worked the mom and pop cases, as well as working the biggest cases that the IRS ever had, right? So he's seen it all. Pete Greco is a legend in New Jersey, right? He was, the SEP groups, your fraud technical advisor, your shop was, Pete, this isn't a criminal case. Don't refer it from exam to criminal. He'd say, they're all criminals. What are you talking about? True, right? Except when you got it. You weren't unbiased. Now he's come to our side, right? Now he's on our side. He actually sees gray.
He actually sees green.
All right. So we're lucky. Now, the other thing is, this is the first night where we're now on Facebook. There is a Facebook site for those who are studying for the tax court exam, and Google Plus. And the people who are watching us on Facebook, look, sometimes there's breaks. There's no credit for the people who are watching us live. You only get credit if you're signing in and signing out, but you can get the materials. They're all online for you, and you can follow along with our speakers tonight. So with those statements, John, Pete, take it away.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, good. So you guys are pretty lucky, actually, to have probably close to 100 years worth of experience in the IRS, sitting here. Frank, who was IRS counsel, criminal counsel when I first started out. Pete, who was just a fabulous colleague to work with when we were coordinating criminal cases and working with referrals from the revenue agents who did the jobs. It was just a teamwork approach to the mission that we had that resulted in a lot of success and a benefit to the United States Treasury. So the bottom line is, let me go ahead. Why don't we push that up a little bit?
The next one.
There we go. So why are there why are a lot of tax prosecutions sensational? And it seems like everything today, people are fascinated with wealth. I think that's been out there for forever. Okay, this guy has so much money. What is it like to have that kind of wealth? Human behavior. How many times you hear the tragedy of a person who had everything, the job, the position, the notoriety, and then of course comes the notoriety. Did you know that they cheated on their taxes or they fell from grace for one reason or another? It seems like Americans are so much into this thing. On one hand, we idolize these folks, and all of a sudden when they fall out of grace, it's always in the news. Tragedy. A lot of people they get involved in schemes, and it literally ruins their family. And it's not uncommon for people to commit suicide or just all kinds of bad things befall someone. Greed, shame, notoriety. It's almost like there's a reality TV perspective connected to some of the cases that we have. Next slide.
Yeah, that's useful.
Okay. Now, I think it would be important to start off with what the overview of the criminal tax prosecution versus an examination. Two very distinct worlds out there. An examination, give us the documentation, we'll figure out if the return is correct, you pay the tax, you move on with your life. Criminal prosecution is basically what we use to put Al Capone away. It's a very egregious crime. It's used to go after sophisticated tax violations, and there are approximately about 5,000 prosecutions of tax cases every year, which is a very small percentage when you think about the IRS going
100%.
Yeah, when you think about the fact that there are probably 200 million tax returns that are looked at one reason or another, so it's a small percentage, but we try to make sure that the cases that are brought forward are worthy of a federal case. We're not going to go after small cases, although everybody here probably has a story of the high school kid whose bank account was seized. That has nothing to do with criminal violations. We're law enforcement officers, carry guns, we arrest people, we use law enforcement techniques to solve our crimes. So the principal violations we use are 7201, tax evasion. And it's always attempted tax evasion. That's the way the statute reads, because there aren't many people who are successful at tax evasion. Then the other crime that we pursue is willful failure to file tax return, 7203. Then there's 7206, which is subscribing to a false return, and there's two parts to that. The first part is the actual taxpayer signing the return under penalties of perjury, or when accountants or preparers get involved and they aid and assist with the preparation of a false return. They're both felonies, and they both could result in ending up in jail. And then there's a few other criminal statutes. There's a 7212, which is what we call a one-person conspiracy.
Hey, closer.
Closer, okay.
Some people can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so the last one I want to talk about, just mentioned, is 7207, which is an altered documents violation. It's a misdemeanor, but if you have a person, this usually comes up during audits, and someone creates false documents to substantiate a deduction, that could result in a 7207 charge. And let me tell you something, over my career, I actually had a referral that involved a draftsman who created or altered bank statements using the correct font. And this is at the time when they weren't, printing them out of the computer. The draftsman actually altered the bank statements from like $100 to $1,100 or some other number, and that was the documentation that was submitted to the revenue agent at the time of the audit to substantiate a deduction. and that was cause for prosecution. Another time, I had a unfortunate case on a revenue agent, former revenue agent, who left and started preparing tax returns, and he ended up getting a lemon of a car. And he creates a false police report to substantiate his casualty loss, and that ended up being a criminal referral that resulted in the person being prosecuted. And just to show you how a person's knowledge plays into the likelihood of prosecution, is that I recommended 7207, which is an altered documents case, and turned in a few documents, and that was part of the basis of the report. Well, when he got to the U.S. Attorney's Office, the guy was holding his ground, insisting that it was wouldn't plead.
So
they indicted him on 1001, which is a felony. And he ended up getting jail time for something that he could have basically walked away from, because he was still working for some agency doing taxes. But this cost the guy his livelihood in the end.
We had, how many people remember Nelson Gross? They had a Republican Party in New Jersey, right? There was altered documents in that case. They were using a firm on lowright. Watching press, I still remember the name. But that was in the paper. And they were just, if you made a donation to the Republican Party, you got a receipt, like it was a business receipt, and again, an altered document case. So they do exist.
Now, there's lots of them. I mean, during our time, there was the return preparer who did lots of firemen and police in Newark, right? And for one price, you got the tax return. For a little bit more, you got the substantiation for the deductions on the tax return. And those were submitted in connection with audits, and they were, false document prosecutions that were submitted, because that was one way to resolve all of those cases. False document is a misdemeanor, but it happens. Most of the people that are charged in the false document cases end up being tax professionals who they're representing a taxpayer during an audit, and they panic and they want to defend the work that they did in preparing the returns. So, I mean, we all want to represent our clients, but we don't want to become the client. So false document cases are seriously, because it obstructs the proper functioning of the Internal Revenue Service, and the service takes very seriously the false document cases. All right, John, how do you get a criminal case? You're in CID. How do you get the criminal case?
Well, I just kind of put down the 4 or 5 that came to mind. Of course, our main function is to support voluntary compliance. So most of our cases come from the civil division, either examination or collection, because if they're not getting the tax, if people are failing to comply with the Internal Revenue Code, there needs to be some bite to the actions and consequences. And the consequences are that you can be referred to the Criminal Investigation Division for consideration on a prosecution. That's just the beginning of the process, okay? There's an audit going on, and it turned out that we know that there's 2 bank accounts, and maybe only the income from one bank account is being deposited, being reported to the accountant to be rolled into the tax return. Overacts that basically result in lies being told to the revenue agent, or some attempt at concealing the extent of the activity. That's what's going to result in a referral. That's the beginning of the process. Criminal investigation, then we'll evaluate it to see if there's potential. We'll be talking about that later on. Collection division. A lot of times collection officers have the task of, they have 1099s that show a person had W-2s, or, well, they have W-2s and 1099s. There's no tax return. It's a substantial amount of money. Those returns, those situations will be referred to the Criminal Investigation Division and see if there was a willful failure to file. Now, a typical case like that goes something like, well, there's 5 prior years they filed tax returns. It's a similar situation, same kind of W-2s or the same 1099s. Then all of a sudden they dropped off the face of the earth. But what a lot of people don't realize is that financial institutions and the organizations that they do work for are cutting 1099s every year. And those go to the IRS, and when they reach a certain level of income, they get referred to an officer. The officer will try, a revenue officer will try to contact the person, see what the reason was for failure to file. If it's something like along the lines of, oh, geez, very sick, I've got bankruptcy proceedings in place, I haven't been able to get to my tax returns, that's one thing. But if they say, hey, you know what, I'll get right back to you, I'll have my account for you, 6 months later, nobody's contacted yet, that could end up being a referral to the criminal division for either failure to pay or failure to file tax returns. Okay, now, failure to file tax returns is a misdemeanor, which means up to a year. However, if you take overt acts to prevent the IRS from determining what your collecting is, what your expenses are, if you even have expenses, that could be elevated to an evasion. It's called a speeds evasion. It's supported by tax law and Supreme Court, and it could go from a misdemeanor to a felony.
On collection division, I just want to add, what we're seeing now that we've never seen before, I mean, not that we've never seen before, but when John and I were working, it was rare that the criminal investigation division actually prosecuted a collection case. We are seeing more than ever the following kinds of collection cases. One, employment tax evasion, where the taxpayer pays employees off the books, right? Contractors. I mean, if you go through just Bergen County headlines, there was a painting contractor, there was a landscaping contractor. I have a sentencing tomorrow on a concrete contractor. The common theme on all of the cases is that employees were paid in cash off the books in industries where it is very common to pay people off the books. In all of these cases, one, the government is looking for jail time because employment taxes are the flavor of the month. And they inquired of the return preparers, well, didn't you realize that these people were paid in cash? You deducted them as subcontractors. You knew that this was wrong when you prepared this return. Where are the 1099s? Where are the W-2s? And there are cases where not only are they looking at the taxpayer, they're looking at the return preparer. So with employment taxes, things have dramatically changed over the last 2 years. Those of us who do collection cases, there's an indictment coming out of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania on a false 433, right? That a false 433 made the taxpayers' finances look more dire than they really were in support of an offering compromise, right? So even things where you say, hey, maybe I'll just value all the assets low, right? That could be the subject of a criminal prosecution from the collection division, right? The flavor of the month now is referrals of failure to pay tax. In addition to attempted evasion, which is most income tax returns, false tax returns, there is a real emphasis on failure to pay. Taxpayers who file returns year after year without full payment. Taxpayers who look for offers and compromise, but don't give the Internal Revenue Service all of the information necessary to evaluate their assets and their income. And taxpayers who are paying their employees off the books or on 1099 when they should be collecting employment taxes and Social Security. So next favorite one.
Another whistleblower cases, ever since they changed the law, it used to be that the largest reward you could get for turning in a person for tax fraud was $25,000. And we had a fair amount of cases that came around because there's a lot of motives for people squealing on somebody. It's not just that they're trying to.
They watch a television show. They think their boss should go to jail.
But
Remember that?
Exactly. But with the whistleblower law, I don't have the specific reference to what it is, but now you could get paid in the millions. Case in point, Birkenfeld, who basically worked for UBS and for whatever reason decided that he was going to take that information and make it available to the government, got paid over $160 million as a reward. And that kind of payment is motivating folks to say, hey, you know what? I don't really like what's going on over here. I think that they're pushing the books for one reason or another. It doesn't have to be a criminal case. It could be a substantial tax assessment. Someone's using an invalid method of accounting for assets, or someone, booking your income a certain way. That results in an unfair, illegal tax benefit. So we're seeing a lot more of those cases. They're complicated. They're not easily resolved. It usually takes a number of years to get resolved, because don't forget, the money is not paid out until there's a settlement. And that means that all the taxpayers' appeal rights, whether the prosecutor, the examined, they have all their appeal rights, and the person doesn't get paid until after the case is closed and the money's paid.
In the civil area, there's lots of litigation, because you can actually litigate the reasonableness of the IRS payment of the reward. That will probably be a question on the exam that's going to be covered when we do the rules of practice and procedure. But there are lots of rights now for the whistleblower, because traditionally there's a perception that the IRS hasn't paid out a fair value for the information received. So whistleblowing is something that is common. Last year, in addition to Birkenfeld was the guy who broke the Swiss bank secrecy. There were 39 million to one. There was $10 million to another. I mean, there have been 8-figure payments to whistleblowers that have brought in lots of money. The whistleblower office, I hope that whistleblowing is going to become one of the best ways for revenue potential discovery. It hasn't worked out as well as they'd liked, but the office is growing, and the number of applications is going up every year. All right. There's one question. Yes.
With Birkenfeld, he didn't have clean hands. He also went to jail for a period of time, didn't
That's
he?
a long story.
But he did.
Very long story.
But you could
But
be a
he got paid.
whistleblower and not have clean hands and still get a reward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Hey, look at Sammy the Bull Gravano. His hands were pretty bloody, and he still got a pretty good deal at the end. If I'm not mistaken, he's still dealing drugs, right?
We can't talk about that one.
Okay. Listen, the next big area of cases for not only the IRS, but virtually every federal agency out there, suspicious activity reports, which are required under the Bank Secrecy Act, that basically compels the bank, and they're indemnified, to report activity that is outside of the realm of what's normal for a business. Now, what does that mean? It means that if you're a deli owner and you normally deposit $10,000 a week, and the next thing you do, you're depositing $100,000 a week, that's suspicious, okay? Or if you, and by the way, it could be suspicious transactions coming in or out of the account. And they start taking effect, the amounts as small as $3,000. So if there's suspicious activity of $3,000 or above, they must report it to the Internal Revenue. It's the Internal Revenue Service, but it's been sent, and those reports are looked at by agencies, and they're able to basically mine those reports for any kind of activity, everything from counterintelligence to organized crime, human trafficking, tax fraud, narcotics trafficking, intellectual property rights. It's all searchable, and you can basically extract information that is very conducive to the type of work your agency does. A lot of times they end up being jointly work with an IRS, because there's always a financial component to it, and they need the expertise of the IRS agents to trace the money or identify the extent of the proceeds and basically see what they did with the money. So IRS is almost always involved with that.
And the trend, right? Banks are encouraged to file these suspicious activity reports because there are penalties for failure to file the reports.
Yeah.
So I think, in my experience, I've started to see over-reporting by banks.
Yeah.
So that they're flooding the Internal Revenue Service with information about taxpayers who deal in cash. I mean, we've had cases started because a guy was taking money out of the bank every Friday to pay his nanny, who may have been off the books. Do you really need, is that so suspicious that they have to send a report into the Internal Revenue Service? But the banks, and there have been some very substantial penalties assessed against small banks.
Right, and the IRS, in addition to the IRS imposing penalties on the banks, you have the Federal Reserve, you have the Office of the Control of the Currency. These folks, when they do their examinations, their bank examinations, there's sections of the report that deal with Bank Secrecy Act and compliance with it.
So,
And
no, I was just gonna say, so more and more, what John is telling you is both criminal and civil cases are starting because your taxpayer is doing what he thought were just, innocent transactions. Some are, just getting cash to pay the cash payment. Others are cash to pay, household help off the books. Others are cash for bad purposes, gambling, drugs,
Bribes.
prostitution. Bribe, that's still bad. I thought we're in New Jersey tonight.
The Soprano State.
If bribes are bad, then yeah, that's gonna get caught by suspicious activity reports.
They're going to exam.
So now,
Oh, yeah.
Pete's been quiet. I want to ask you, Pete, we're in exam, right? Because you saw that everybody was criminal. What really? You didn't refer every case that an agent gave you and said, hey, let's send this one to CI. So what was it that either the folks in the audience did or the taxpayers did that would cause you to say, this civil examination should really be a criminal case? We want to put this guy in the can.
Well, first of all, all agents, when they come out, they're checking your books and records, you're checking your internal control. But when your internal control is weak in some of the smaller businesses, they're going to the bank deposit analysis. And then they start actively looking for income. Usually you have badges of fraud, which they're all told about, and they're in the reading material. They list all the badges of fraud, there's understandings of income, there's over deposits are in excess of gross receipts. These are the kind of things that we're looking at, which tend us then to broaden the exam of income and then possibly write a fraud referral. Nowadays, the agents have an added benefit of having a fraud technical advisor who is a SEP agent.
SEP, tell them what SEP means.
That SEP is a special enforcement program of IRS, which for all agents who are experts in the fraud area, they will give you special training. And when they come out to you, it's a little different ballgame. They're not criminal agents, but most of their stuff could wind up in a criminal referral. But today, the agents, if they think they've found income, bring in the fraud technical advisor who will look at the case and even work with them to help support that case so a proper referral can be made. So if a fraud technical advisor is coming out to your office or you hear the agent saying, I got to refer to the fraud, you better start thinking, this could be a potential criminal case. And you have to do course and know what you're gonna do.
So before the audit starts, right, we all do our pre-audit prep. We always say, and I tell everybody, if you can't get to line 1 and match up, then we're gonna have a problem. What can they do? If they prep and they see, hey, we got a problem, should they file an amended return before the exam? Should they not? What works for you?
They can't file an amended return at that point because IRS has control on the case. So if you did, it would reject. So basically, you have to start thinking, well, what am I going to do next?
So they tell them to lie?
I'm not telling you it's to lie.
Should they come in
start
and
thinking of
confess?
possible defenses, hiring people who specialize in this area, because it gets quickly out of control where you may have let information out that really you shouldn't have. And that's the problem with some of these cases. Because next thing you know, after that referral is made, there's a special agent coming to your door, unannounced, asking you certain questions about income deposits, about internal control, about what was done, who handles the mail. These are important things to do when you're preparing tax returns. See how the money's coming in, who opens the mail every day, how does it get deposited, who makes the deposit slips. All these things are important because the first thing taxpayers are going to say when the income comes up, the preparedness. And that's the first person usually the special agent is going out to interview. So you got to keep these things in mind. And also, it's in every agent today has it's called an RGS system. And they have all the questions they have to answer and all the preliminary stuff they have to do. They do cash fees are provided for them. Multiple and subsequent year tax returns are in there. 1099s are in there. Currency transaction reports are in there. When these agents come out to you, they have a loaded file today. So you have to really, if you think there's a problem, you really have to start thinking what you're going to do with this case because these files are loaded.
What works and what doesn't work, right? This is what they want to know. They were doing exams, right? If they prep for an exam, they've done their cash key, they're worried. They found someone reported income, right? Or the bank rec doesn't work, or whatever. They've done their pre-audit, they're worried. What's the best thing that they can do? Yeah, what they gotta, right? They can't just say, I'm not coming in. All right. So really, they want to hear from you. what works, right, from there, because they're seeing it from our side. Now, well, our side, yeah, right, the good side. And now if we're gonna go into the home of evil, right? And we're gonna see it from your side, where you think that everybody is bad. What can they do to salvage it, to make sure that that exam doesn't go criminal? I mean, we're gonna talk about what happens and the consequences of criminal. What's the best practices? What do you think they should do?
I would make sure I know where all the income comes from, where all deposits come from. I would analyze my deposits, see what they're made up of, make sure they're not income. I would reconcile that tax. You would be shocked to see how many times that return doesn't even tie into the books and records or to anything that the accountants have. This is the big problem. You have to make sure at the minimum, your tax return ties into your books and records, because once the agents see that that's not working out, then they're going into your bank deposits, and they're not just going into your business. They're going into your personal bank accounts, which a lot of people don't understand. Once they start looking and they find stuff, they're asking you for every bank account you have, not just your business accounts, your savings accounts. They're looking everywhere. So your best is to be prepared for these audits, because a lot of people are not prepared. They don't do their homework, and they get hit cold with this stuff, because that agent's file already is loaded up with all the stuff that he can get. They even do real estate searches. They do searches on everything.
Yeah. One of the most important parts in this maneuvering that happens during the examination process is making the taxpayer available or not. Because I can't tell you how many times the desire of the taxpayer to explain what happened is basically considered an admission or it's a lie. Either way, it works for the government.
We tell the clients all the time, if you have to explain, you've already lost.
Right. So those of you that become powers of attorney, you really have to understand that you're the firewall between the taxpayer making an admission or telling a lie and he or she exercising the full extent of the protection they have under the Constitution of the United States. You don't have to testify if you know that there's something out there. Let the government prove it.
If you do your pre-audit work and you aren't happy, right? And we did a class on cash and all the stuff you're going to do on pre-audit, so I'm not going to remind you of all of what you do in a pre-audit, but remember the lines. I say it all the time. You would rather crawl over ground glass naked than let your client talk to the Internal Revenue Service in what you call an eggshell examination. All right? There were years that everybody's telling you got to take a risk. They can do it. These are businessmen. They've been successful. They can talk their way through it, right? There is 0% in having your clients talk to the revenue agents during an eggshell audit. I have very few absolute rules. This is one of your absolute rules. But we've gone a little bit off track. Next, let's take this to, another way that we didn't do this. They read the paper, right? The special agents sometimes have created cases from just reading the paper. Public information.
About social media.
And social media. You want to keep your clients out of the newspaper. One of my lines is, if I wake up in the morning and I don't see a client's name in the Post, I think I'm going to have a good day. All right. So let's go to VSA.
Okay, well, I think we, go ahead.
John, I got a question. For some of us, there is what I call the civil audit, and then there's the SEP. I've been involved with both, and usually the SEP is kind of a higher level, where someone has provided, as you said, the information, and they're one step beyond the criminal. Whereas
One step
before.
Right.
One step before, thank you, correct. So what I'm asking is, what kind of cases go to SEP versus the general audit?
What's SEP gets grand jury investigations, one, and they also get high-profile taxpayers. They get SARS cases. They get leads from other federal agencies.
Voluntary
Right.
disclosure cases?
Right now, they're getting, what is inundating SEP right now around the country is the Department of Justice entered into a voluntary disclosure program, disclosure initiative with about 80 banks finished up, Swiss banks, right? Not everybody who had those Swiss accounts has done voluntary disclosure or been criminally prosecuted, and they don't have the resources to do them all. But the data mining from the information that the banks have turned over have created a lot of SEP cases. So some of the cases, and you'll know it from the first IDR. If your first IDR is asking you about foreign accounts, and there's no check the box on Schedule B, there's no foreign real estate on Schedule E, but you've got an IDR that asks 3 or more FBAR questions, there's a good likelihood that that is coming from the data that has been mined from the 80 banks that are in the program. Those are gonna be, I mean, nationwide, it's gonna be statistically significant. It's thousands of cases.
There's a lot of those cases.
The other cases that you're seeing a lot of from SEP right now are check cashing cases. There are taxpayers who are taking business checks and they're going to check cashers in order to generate cash that they need for their business. And those cases, not all of them result in criminal referrals. I mean, they could. Just think about the lines at every check casher in New Jersey. The SEP groups are seeing a lot of those cases. And that's where I'm saying, when you're coming from a SEP group, what you do is pretty determinative of whether or not a case is going to close civilly, where the client is just going to spend money, or be referred over criminally. There's no hard and fast answer in every case, but in every case, you should do the analysis in order to know where the IRS will go if they actually do summons the bank accounts, if they go after and see from the payer of the invoices, were they all reported? I mean, and that's what you're seeing from the SEP group. And that's that's where most of you will probably see your first criminal referrals coming from.
And just from an administrative point, these criminal cases or these special program cases take a long time. And most revenue agents are working on a very tight cycle time. I mean, I was a revenue agent 25 years ago, and I can tell you how much time is on a 1040, how much is on 1120, and how much time is related parties. So those referrals are generally worked by a specialist in the SEP group, that there are accommodations made to allow for the extra analysis, the extra work that's required. And I don't know if you want to cover a little bit more.
Also, when they created that fraud technical assistance program, when a case is considered, or a referral is being written, a normal case is status 12, meaning a regular case. When it's a SEP case or a criminal referral, it immediately goes to status 17, meaning they take it out of the overage count. And in IRS, everything is counted. So that agent is given the time to work that case. So the old delay tactics, not giving them the bank stuff and all that stuff, the agent has the time to work the case. Once they put it in status 17, and once it's accepted, they put it in a higher level, status 18. So, I mean, they really have strengthened that program, and things can get antsy pretty quickly.
So I think we've covered some of these.
Right.
Tom, why don't you take us through the rest?
I'll just run through this, but a lot of, since you're accountants, you don't really realize what's going on in the day-to-day operations of a client. That could be drawing attention from law enforcement or regulatory agencies. I mean, currency transaction reports have been around for what, 35 years or more. But those have kind of gone the way of cash purchases. People used to take the cash and buy stuff with it. Now they have to report that to the IRS. Structuring has gotten more people in trouble for not really.
Tell them what structuring is.
Structuring basically is breaking an amount of $10,000 or more into amounts less than $10,000 and having do it on a recurring way to avoid the reporting of the cash transaction to the Internal Revenue Service. And by the way, it's money in or money out. So structuring cash transactions can lead to from a case being referred to examination or criminal investigation to a seizure, which is another part of what clients are faced with when they're dealing with cash. They could suffer a tremendous financial loss without ever being subject to an audit or subject to an investigation. Just come there and whoosh, swoop it right up if they structure the money or if they, well, primarily structuring the money.
Right.
Okay?
I mean, one of the things in practice, how do you see this? You'll see a tax return that says $35,000 of gross income, but a CTR is filed by a casino saying that the person bought more than $10,000 in chips. Well, how does that fly? So when the service sees that, right? And these currency transaction reports, there was the former governor of New York was entering into suspicious currency transactions. Why is the governor, taking out this much cash from his bank accounts? And that resulted in a criminal prosecution. The government is getting information from third parties more and more. And that third party matching is what is triggering audits, and the audits, if not handled properly, result in a referral to the Criminal Investigation Division. Yes?
You were talking about the check cashing places to make reports. Do the banks do that also?
Yes.
That's a suspicious activity.
That's a
report.
suspicious
No,
activity.
if you go and cash.
If you're over 10,000, that's why they ask you for your driver's license. Yeah,
No, if you go in and the guy cashes an income check, instead of putting it in, he cashes a $500 check.
I am a holder. $500 won't result. Usually it's
Okay,
$3,000.
let me tell you, these check cashers, let's say the check casher projects that a lot of the agencies are looking at are corporate clients who take a corporate check for $5,000, $6,000, $8,000, $10,000, and they're trying to generate currency for some other means.
I understand that, but to the banks.
Yeah.
If in much smaller amounts.
Right.
Do they report, I've never seen it.
3,000.
I've never seen it before.
You're never going to see the suspicious
You're not gonna
activity
see it.
reports. They don't give to you. All right.
It's confidential.
It is confidential. The bank is immunized from giving them to you. You will not see them, even if you do a Freedom of Information Act request.
No,
You will not see them.
I've never had one where the agent said, you have this much more income because of information that we've received. from
Okay.
where- I know they're not gonna tell me that.
Right. I could spend a few days on suspicious activity reports at Bank Secrecy Act, okay? There's a reason first of all, you cannot disclose the fact that there's a suspicious activity filed on anyone, even in the government's hands. And number two, there's other ways of getting that information to the point where it can be used, it's actionable, when it comes to meeting with a taxpayer or dealing with a contact with a third party. Okay, so in other words, it's not going to be because of the SAR that we're contacting you. There's going to be another reason why there is a contact. And it could be a seizure, it could be a knock on the door, it could be a letter from an agency saying, it turns out that, so-and-so, you happen to work in the embassy, what are you doing with all this cash? Okay, and it's not going to be about the SAR, it's going to be about the currency. And that is something that will be elevated or exposed to.
It's a clue to falsity on the return. That's all it is.
You're talking about check cash. I understand the bank.
Right.
You can take a corporate check.
Right.
So let's say I had a corporation, I called Laura's Corp.
Right.
And then Laura takes out a check for cash and check cash in place. So that would be, even if it was, let's say, $4,000.
Right.
That would trigger them, why would I go there when I could do it at the bank? Is that what you're trying to say?
No,
Need the check
no.
to be payable to the corporation.
No.
The corporation isn't putting it into their own
It's
account.
not going into your bank account, so it's really just.
Oh, you're talking about it's addressed to the corporation.
Right.
Lots of, look,
That's-
and what did the accountants do? And this is the problem, right? Say you have a business that gets lots of corporate checks, right? They need to pay expenses in cash. They go to the check casher. They don't, instead of depositing into the accounts that you're using to prepare the return, they cash the check. Then they use the check to pay the cash payroll. You're thinking, even if you know about it, they net. So what's the big deal? But they don't net. because of the employment taxes that should have been paid.
Okay.
That's what gets prosecuted. So it's a false income tax return, right? Because you haven't reported all of your gross receipts. It's a false employment tax return because the cash payroll you should have had withholding from. They have structured. I mean, it false, false workers' comp, false state return. I mean, they can just, the related conduct that results in the jail time from employment taxes is big because it's a conspiracy with each of the employees to evade their taxes. So you're now on the hook for all of the taxes that should have been paid by all of the employees that have been paid in cash off the books. Traditionally, for years, at the IRS, we never wanted to prosecute those cases. Today, it is the flavor of the month. All right. So, John, you called me, all right, or Pete called me. You referred me to criminal, so I'm just going to pay now. Can I just pay and let this be over? Is it done?
No.
Come on. I'm going to give you lots of money. I'm going to offer a penalty, a civil penalty on top of that. Can you just leave me alone?
All right. By the time it gets to the criminal investigation division and there's a recommendation for prosecution, it's too late. The sole purpose of a criminal case being brought is to foster compliance and bring forward criminal sanctions, incarcerations. There are criminal penalties, and of course, there's sometimes restitution or some other form of social remediation that's doled out by the courts. So, by the time it becomes a criminal case, there's no settling it by paying the taxes and going away. It becomes a sentencing issue. At the time you go through the conviction or plead guilty or whatever, you and your counsel will try to argue for leniency by showing, hey, I paid it right away once I realized I was wrong. I cooperated. There's a few things you can do.
Why don't I just see the nice soft spot? If you put me in jail, then I can't pay. So, and I got to take care of my wife and kids. Is that going to work with you?
At that point, we're out of the picture. It's between you and the judge and the
No, so you
probation.
just don't refer the criminal process, make the case go back. Send it back to Pete.
That doesn't work.
It doesn't work that way.
So I got to pay and I got to go to jail.
And then I come back for the civil.
That's why these are very severe sanctions. I'm pretty sure nobody here thinks that, people are going to jail for, a few $1,000s in wrongdoing. These are substantial economic crimes that the government must pursue because it affects an industry, it affects a social, an area of society. For example, a lot of these false return cases or the questionable refund program impacts people who are very low on the economic scale. You're really victimizing them, so they're not getting most of the money, the preparers get most of the money. And they're being exploited. And that scenario plays itself out, whether it's tax fraud, whether it's Medicare fraud, whether it's any kind of scheme that taps into the government money.
Or I'm going to talk about John's very serious criminals because we're going to have a little bit of a different definition. What if I'm going to go get a haircut, all right? And then I learned that, hey, they don't take my checks. And have you ever heard of a case where, as a result of not taking a government employee's check, that a search warrant was done, maybe in West Orange, and they prosecuted people who cut hair and nail girls? Do you remember that? No, those serious criminals, the people who cut the hair?
Yes, because it can be.
Okay, see, that's our definitional difference, right?
Okay.
He's saying these are the big people that are evading tax.
But see, it always boils down to non-compliance in a segment of the economy.
Yes.
So if you have non-compliance in the nail salon business, guess what? They're going to target it. Are they going to prosecute everybody? No, but they will pick the most egregious ones, and those folks will be prosecuted. Hey, who prosecutes nurses? But you know what? There was a period of time where these private duty nurses were making hundreds of thousands of dollars over a few-year period, and it was all paid in cash under the table. It was not a pretty case, but they weren't pretty cases, but they had to go forward because you have substantial non-compliance. You can't audit them because, cash is a fungible item. How do you prove it?
There was
So-
painters, roofers,
Yeah.
pizza.
The
There's a
mission,
lot of.
The purpose, right, and I joke about it, but because we have cases against landscapers, we have cases against contractors, we have cases against the Atlantic City cocktail waitresses, we have cases against the private duty nurses, the nail girls, the hair cutters.
Prostitutes,
The
drug dealers,
right, I mean,
everything.
Look, Congressman, right? I mean, the first congressman that I had represented said, Frank, I didn't know you were supposed to report the bribes. I was just asking more, you know, is it price sensitive? Or another one who said, well, what good is getting the bribe in cash if I gotta put it on my tax return? All right, so even people who you think are a little bit more sophisticated, right? They're under John's watch. So yes, the government's definition is based on the mission. The mission is to encourage self-assessment and voluntary compliance, right? So criminal prosecution is to coerce, not really, to coerce voluntary compliance, right? It's to send the message, right? There but for the grace of God go on, that anybody who doesn't fulfill his obligations or her obligations to the United States can be incarcerated. So yes, the government's very good in picking the cases that will have the biggest deterrent effect, right? And John's got a slide here now. It's going to tell you, how they decide among it. But important doesn't mean that it's got to be big dollars, or that they have to be congressmen or drug dealers or really bad people. Because one of the things that you will see once you have these cases, the overwhelming majority of people in criminal tax cases have had no other criminal conviction in their lives. They are people who, for the most part, are people who own their own businesses, who are self-employed, who think that the American dream is to be able to write off their personal expenses on their tax return. But again, now, from that universe, right, Pete sends you a lot of cases. Now, do you accept every case that Pete sends you?
No.
Okay. Now, how do you decide, right? Because Pete sends you everything.
We only send about 100 a year.
Okay.
So what happens is when a case is referred to the criminal investigation, case agent gets it and they review the package, includes tax returns, the so-called allegations. I just happen to have found some of the jewels I worked on when I was carrying a bag. And I'll read you one of them just so you get a flavor of it, and then I can expand on it. So this referral alleges that Joe Blow, an attorney at law, has arbitrarily deducted expenses on Schedule C. It was noted that Joe Blow claimed net losses of $14,000 for the last 3 years. The losses were incurred during the conduct of her business, a private law practice with offices in New York, New Jersey. Now, this is after discussing the referral with Revenue Agent Joe Blow, I have determined that this referral lacks criminal potential and a reasonable probability of conviction does not exist for the following reasons. Number one, corrected taxable income was computed by categorically disallowing all Schedule C deductions. In other words, the referral was, hey, the guy has all these Schedule C expenses? I think they're nonsense. They're out of here. Results in a tax loss, okay? That's not enough to warrant a tax prosecution.
Nor would that happen today with the technical advice. Wouldn't make it through it.
Furthermore, additional income and tax as computed by the revenue agent are thus estimates and considered unacceptable under Department of Justice guidelines for use in criminal prosecution. Department of Justice guidelines. They basically govern what we are allowed to recommend prosecution on. They decide whether or not cases are such that they warrant a criminal prosecution. Once again, you're talking about taking someone's liberty away. So it has to rise to a very high level of egregiousness before it could be brought forward.
The Department of Justice looks at the case. They look at three things. One, does the evidence support a finding of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? That means every element of the offense can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt. Two, is there a reasonable probability of conviction? Is there something that either the IRS did or something unique to the taxpayer which would suggest that the case should not be prosecuted? That's why you'll see things like health is sometimes taken into account, or the Twill case, where the government did some wrongdoing in order to induce a confession. And the last piece of it is what's sold, that the prosecution must further a substantial federal interest, all right? Now, the government usually argues the substantial federal interest is that the prosecution will promote voluntary compliance by similarly situated taxpayers. But there is some room to argue big picture that this prosecution will actually hinder a substantial federal interest. That although you may technically have a tax crime, that the prosecution of this taxpayer is unwarranted, and then you would give those reasons. So there is, what John will tell you, so there's a couple of levels of review. Any person in the chain can kill the criminal case. One, Pete's level, right? The fraud technical advisor can look at a case and say, hey, all the agent did was disallow all the deductions. He doesn't know whether or not the deductions were bona fide or not. Two, at the special agent level, the special agent gets a referral from Pete, but Pete could say, look, this isn't developed enough, or we don't think the evidence supports a finding of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Then at the end of that process, there's a conference with the local counsel office, and they evaluate it the same way. Then you get a meeting at the Department of Justice Tax Division, and finally with the U.S. Attorney. So criminal cases, if you use every conference opportunity, you have 5 opportunities to convince the Department of Justice or the Internal Revenue Service that the case should not be prosecuted criminally. All right. With that said, the number of declinations is very, very small, because the special agents of the Internal Revenue Service know, especially today, how to button down a case. All right? And it's not moving forward in the service unless they really believe that the evidence is sufficient to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Right? And if the proof isn't there, those are the cases that go to trial. There is a statistically significant number of failure to file cases that end up in not guilty verdicts, right? There's one lawyer in New York who's just like on a roll with not guilties. But most of the cases, over 90% of cases, once they're referred to prosecution, government wins.
So your best opportunity to basically take the case out of the criminal possibility realm and keep it as a civil matter is when you're dealing with the revenue agent or the special agent. Now, some people would argue that there's strategies you could take. You don't want to say this in front of the revenue agent, save it for the special agent. That's something that you'll have to work out with your defense team or with your advisors when you're going through a situation like that. But you absolutely want to get the case out there. By the time a special agent has documented the income, interviewed the witnesses, established that there's a tax loss and that it was done willfully with the intent to defeat the tax, you really need to be talking about another area which is called weaknesses and defenses, okay? If there's a weakness to a case, you have a saying, weaknesses are fatal, defenses are overcome, all right? A weakness is something like, you're not gonna prosecute a guy who won the Congressional Medal of Honor. Honestly, I was faced with that in my career, and we did not prosecute that individual.
Or the president's psychiatrist.
The president, I don't know about that. But someone, you don't want to prosecute.
I said no.
You're not going to prosecute someone who's ill. You're not going to prosecute someone who's in dire financial conditions. You're not going to prosecute a guy who embezzled or diverted the proceeds to treat sick mother, sick daughter, sick child. It's against public policy to bring cases like that. So jury appeal is definitely a weakness that we would kill the case.
Yes, because remember, there's 3 things. One is the evidence has to establish the guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. But the next is there's got to be a reasonable probability of conviction. In a criminal case, all you need is one juror to say, I don't think this person should go to jail, and you won't get a conviction. And many criminal tax cases are not retried. If you hang a jury, if you hang the case, you haven't lost. And your goal in criminal cases is just not to lose today. All right. So that's why when you look at jury appeal is will the jury say, there before the grace of God go on? When they do the instruction, that you have to look at this as if the defendant was a member of your family, right? And you're gonna make this, would you make this serious decision if this was a member of your family, right? And that's why the prosecuting the employees, right? But they just did, when we were there, we would never prosecute waiters or waitresses in restaurants, right? For getting paid in cash or books. I mean, that, again, that's changed flavor of the month, right? Because now there's those restaurants at the Jersey Shore, they prosecuted the college kids who were being in cash off the books, right? I would not want to prosecute those cases because I could find a juror who said that could be my son, that could be my daughter. Are we going to ruin their lives because they took a summer job getting paid in cash? I mean, I was shocked when I saw that that's, being prosecuted now. For financial condition, the exception there is if you spent all the money stupidly, like the QVC case, right? It was an employment tax case prosecuted. The woman had spent all the money on QVC. That's why she didn't have it to pay the tax.
I'm talking about someone who's earnestly trying to keep the business afloat, and for reasons, economic reasons beyond their control, the product becomes obsolete or whatever, it just would not make sense to prosecute this person.
All right, so the last comment, because we're running out of time, is, okay, we've been caught, criminal prosecution has been recommended. What can you do to help yourself, John?
All right. Well, listen, just go back one. I'm going to run through the one real fast. Okay, what does it mean when you're criminally prosecuted? Of course, there's the investigation, which could be, and then could result in a devastating impact to you as a person in your community, in your profession. Then there's the indictment, which right after that is the publicity, which is essential to the investigation because, once again, at this point, we're trying to foster the highest level of voluntary compliance. So there's going to be a tax indictment, there's going to be publicity. The trial, once again, there's going to be publicity for that. This witness came in, that accountant said this person took the money and spent it on this, that, the other thing. That's all the stuff that the government's going to try and get in, and it's going to generate publicity. Of course, the conviction gets a publicity, and the sentencing publicity. We used to do perp walks. There was a whole reason behind it. There was a reason behind it. You want to see that, hey, this could be me being escorted by two ugly guys with badges and jackets on, and then you have all the media snapping away. It's devastating. And people would say, oh, the person only got a year in jail. But you know what? A white-collar person, to have their whole world turned upside down by being prosecuted for a white-collar type of crime, tax fraud or whatever, it ruins them. Because why are they taking the money? They want to live hot. They want to make an impression in their social circle. I had a case one time where the guy was a very prominent businessman. He'd go to cocktail parties, everybody would be talking about how they cheat on their taxes, and he felt put out. So he goes to his poor accountant and says, hey, guess what? You got to come up with a scheme. And the poor guy did. He succumbed. What was the scheme? One of the oldest tricks in the books. You pay, you take the money out as a loan, you pay back the loan with pre-tax dollars. And at the end of the day, the accountant became the target of an investigation because the only way this guy, it was a multi-million-dollar tax loss, the only way this guy could get a downward departure from the sentence was to cooperate. So he wore a wire against his accountant, baptized his kids. I mean, think of how unsavory that whole experience is in order to try and get yourself out of jail. I'm happy to say that he was sentenced. His sentencing was before Judge Thompson in Camden on Valentine's Day. I couldn't make it, but she had the guy crying, and he did, because he cooperated. He didn't get jail time, but he came close. So close that he broke down and almost lost it.
Yeah.
But that's how ugly it gets. So,
It gets ugly.
I'm
We
gonna
finished our
stop
first hour.
doing that.
Yeah.
all right.
Oh, I just had an accountant in Bergen who did that. He admitted that that's what he did. He told the client to just put the money into his personal account, lend it back to the corporation. He built up a huge loan account. Then when the corporation made money, paid it back to him tax-free. He thought he was the smartest guy on the planet until CID came over. But so I think we've done the first hour. We're going to take our break now. For those of you at home, we're taking a 5-minute break, and then we're going to go back to the civil side of the aisle.
Yeah.